Gene Sharp has devoted more than 3 decades researching, documenting, and publishing in this pursuit. He first responds to the question of hope in confronting these problems.
Despite the gravity of many of our problems, there are realistic grounds for hope. Unlike the great natural disasters, such as earthquakes or tidal waves or volcanic eruptions, our problems are human problems. They have been created by human beings, and therefore, as human beings, we could solve them. In fact, we have major resources which we could place at the disposal of people to work on solving these problems if we choose to do so. Economic resources, material, intellectual resources, and resources in communications. There is a vast human history of people who have struggled by means other than violence in order to wage their conflicts. They have fought with social weapons, psychological, economic, and political weapons. If we looked at these, gain some insights, note, for example, that they have been waged not by saints or specialists in strategy and tactics, but by ordinary people who had no special qualities, no training, no preparation, and really often no understanding of what was required for effectiveness with that type of struggle. The results of those efforts have been mixed. Many of those struggles were failures, as is true in many violent struggles and wars. Sometimes the results were mixed, partial successes. And sometimes there were major victories of historic importance. Now, if we wished, we could examine this type of struggle, learn how consciously to improve its effectiveness, and how to adapt it to new purposes in the future, in which otherwise people might have used violence. We could perhaps learn how to adapt this for international conflicts, where in the absence of such means, people will again resort to war. But this historical experience and our potential to use our intellectual and other resources to refine and adapt nonviolent forms of struggle can give us new, realistic grounds for hope.
Dr. Gene Sharp recalls a little-remembered but tremendously significant case that occurred in the early stages of World War II. In this historically documented case, a group, originally just 12 people, organized the confrontation against Hitler's Gestapo and fascist forces. Later, President Roosevelt, in paying tribute, said, "If anyone were to doubt the strength of the will of the people, let them look to Norway." The Norwegian Teachers' Revolt.
The scene is Norway. It is 1942. Norway is occupied by German troops, ruled by the government of the Norwegian fascist Vidkun Quisling and his National Union Party. Quisling had long wanted to create a new order for Norway, which for him meant the establishment of the corporate state, which would regiment all the Norwegian people through their professions and occupations under dictatorially controlled organizations. Quisling chose the teachers to be the first profession he would bring under the new corporation. That organization would then provide the model for other professions and occupations. And also, the teachers, once controlled, could be used to indoctrinate the children in fascist ideology. The civil resistance leadership based in Oslo had prepared a plan for resistance in such a contingency. And they spread those instructions all over Norway, sometimes by personal messages, some by handwritten notes. It was to the effect that in light of the teachers' responsibility and loyalty to the Norwegian Constitution and their responsibility to the children, the teachers could not regard themselves as members of the new fascist organization. Every teacher throughout Norway, there were approximately 12,000 of them, were to write that statement in their own hand, sign their own names and addresses, and mail it to the fascist-controlled Department of Education. Some 10,000 of the 12,000 Norwegian teachers indeed did write that statement. The government panicked. Then about 1,000 of the male teachers were arrested, and after a short while sent to the concentration camp at Jørstadmoen, northeast of Oslo. It was already winter, and there was little or no heat in the barracks. The teachers were put on starvation diet. They were put through what was called torture gymnastics in the deep snow. And out of the approximately 900 teachers in that camp, only a mere handful retracted their protests. It was very important to the German and Norwegian fascists that the teachers withdraw their protests, because without that withdrawal, they did not have the necessary submission and cooperation to get the fascist corporative state established. In the meanwhile, with the teachers blocking the establishment of this corporation, Quisling could not proceed with the rest of the work for setting up the corporate state, nor even with the fascist indoctrination of the children. Finally, he went to a school near Oslo in the village of Stabekk. He was in his full regalia, the fascist uniform with all his ribbons. He called the teachers down to the first floor and ranted and raved and screamed at them, ending with the words, "You teachers have destroyed everything for me." It was true. And those words later echoed throughout the valleys and mountains of the whole length of Norway, and were a rallying cry for continuing resistance.
But not all sparks that light continue to burn. Gene Sharp shares the experience of the non-Jewish wives protesting the imprisonment of their Jewish husbands in Nazi Germany.
The trucks covered with heavy canvas rolled through the streets of Berlin that day. They stopped at the homes where Jews lived, or in the factories and offices where they worked. And those males who were married to non-Jewish wives were taken to a particular prison on the Rosenstrasse. And then something happened which had never happened in the whole history of the Third Reich before. Public defiance on behalf of Jews, as their wives got word as to where their husbands were, and about 6,000 of them gathered in the square for that prison. They had no weapons, only their bodies and their voices and their courage. And they demanded that their Jewish husbands be released. And their husbands did something that no imprisoned Jew was ever supposed to do. They went to the windows of the prison and demanded their own release. The account in Ulstein's book says that the authorities were frightened. They didn't know how to handle that type of resistance. They approached the women and said they would negotiate. The Gestapo headquarters was only a short distance away, and they asked the women to be reasonable. And the women demanded their husbands be released. And finally they were. Holstein was one of the men, and his wife was one of those who demonstrated. But he said that could have been a spark, which might have lit the general fire of resistance to the Nazi system. It didn't do that, but it was an accomplishment by 6,000 nonviolent women. Except for the end of the war, the most major defeat Hitler had ever suffered.